Good morning. Sabah al khair, boker tov. My name is Jenna Ben Yehuda. I'm the Executive Vice President here at the Atlantic Council. Welcome to a really urgent and important conversation. Thank you for joining us today. At a time when Israel and Gaza have suffered truly unimaginable horror, pain, and just tremendous violence since October 7th, 2023, the emotions associated with having conversations on this issue really challenge all of our abilities to address them in a thoughtful manner with nuance and empathy. My own ability to process this difficult moment and to learn about how to move forward has been informed by the voices of many from across Israel and Gaza. One of my teachers is Ahmed al-Khatib, who joined the Atlantic Council last year as a senior fellow and is the leader of the Realign For Palestine initiative we're here to launch today. Ahmed has emerged as a prominent Palestinian voice from Gaza, and through his writing, work, and efforts, many have come to appreciate the hardships one faces when challenging dominant views within spaces and communities where there is pressure to maintain the appearance of unity. Instead of unity, however, what can often emerge is a sense of compelled conformity and cohesion that can prevent intra-community dialogue and internal reflections or introspection. The Palestinian people have endured hardships, injustices, and challenges from multiple stakeholders and face daily horrendous levels of violence and devastation in Gaza due to the war that was triggered by Hamas's horrendous attack on October 7th. For the past year and a half, charged rhetoric, incendiary language, problematic symbolism, imagery, sloganeering, and deeply polarizing campus activism have undermined the Palestinian national project for freedom, dignity, and independence. The discourse has grown more divisive than ever, in part because of the ineffective actions and behaviors that Ahmed has regularly decried and called out on the part of the pro-Palestine movement in the diaspora that he feels has failed to positively leverage global sympathies for the Palestinians into substantive cultural or policy changes. Worse, public and overt support for extremist and violent elements of the Palestinian national project, like Hamas and armed factions, have become normalized, leading to the adoption of maximalist rhetoric and zero-sum approaches that have been immensely harmful and detrimental to peace. And while the words of radicals and extremists often drown out other voices, the Palestinian community in the land and the diaspora, like any other, naturally has a diversity of voices and opinions that are not in alignment because they lack a political home and a place to share their perspectives and stories. In that spirit, today's gathering is meant to illuminate and elevate voices seeking to reclaim the narrative and story they care so deeply about from those who have harmed it. Realign for Palestine at the Atlantic Council aims to be a starting point for a new school of thought that is deeply pro-Palestine while also holding space for multiple truths, such as the rejection of violence, acknowledging the rights of Israelis to safety and security, the promotion of radical pragmatism, the rejuvenation of the Palestinian narrative, and the evolution of peace and reconciliation into courageous and admirable acts. Realign for Palestine will convene a network of activists, scholars, journalists, and policymakers who will shape a new era of Palestinian advocacy that prioritizes state building and coexistence. The network will engage with governments, NGOs, and multilateral organizations to advocate for policies that support Palestinian self-determination and security guarantees for Israel. The Atlantic Council champions working together with partners and allies to shape solutions to global challenges, and this is precisely the ethos that Realign for Palestine embraces as well. The Council is very proud to be the home of this critical project and for bold voices advocating for the future of Palestinian statehood. This morning, we will hear from the project's founder and leader, Ahmed al-Khatib, a Gaza native, about the challenging journey that led him to this moment. He is joined by two other Palestinians from Gaza, Kamal al-Mashharawi and Hamza Abu Hawadi, who both experienced life in the coastal enclave under the blockade, Hamas's tyrannical rule, and the unimaginable horrors of the most recent war. They will share their perspectives on why efforts like Realign for Palestine at the Atlantic Council are meaningful pathways forward. I want to share a personal plea that you please afford them the courtesy and respect they deserve, even if you do not share their views. Please be cognizant of the immense suffering and hardships that all three and their families and loved ones in Gaza have endured and are still experiencing. Not to mention the tremendous personal and communal challenges they face for speaking their minds against the dominant tides. Let us be a model today for the very kind of respectful dialogue that Realign for Palestine seeks to elevate. Thank you for being here with us this morning. I hope you find this exchange illuminating and helpful, and that it offers a new window into Palestinian thinking and the intellectual diversity of the Palestinian people in Gaza and beyond, and that you continue to follow the growth of this movement. Thank you.
Even if I get attacked, even if it ultimately costs me my life, I stand before you today as a survivor and an optimistic believer in a better future for both the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Israel, Palestine. Capital of conflict, land of lost opportunities, home of heartbreak. Since 1948, the Middle East has been stuck in a cycle of violence. Violence that has failed to bring statehood for Palestinians and failed to bring peace and security for Israelis, while a history of extremism repeats itself. Then came October 7th, Hamas's atrocious terrorist attack in Israel and a horrific escalation of violence and war in Gaza that brought enough pain and suffering to reverberate for generations.
We have breaking news. Hamas has launched a surprise attack.
The fear, the urgency as people flee.
Hamas militants are targeting civilians, taking more than 100 hostage.
With global attention turning to the spiraling death toll,
authorities in Gaza are urgently seeking aid.
Get out of the ashes, out of the despair. Peace is still possible. It has to be. While Hamas sympathizers continue to call for violent resistance, it's time for pragmatic and moderate voices and allies to speak out for common sense, to realign for Palestine. To realign from black and white narratives to multiple truths. To realign from violent extremism to radical pragmatism. To realign from hateful words to helpful actions, to realign from subverting peace to peaceful activism. Two states can't wait. The time to realign for Palestine is now.
Peace is not treacherous. Peace is not weak. Peace is courageous. Peace is a necessary evolution to save what can be saved of our people. Peace is what's going to get us Palestinian statehood and Palestinian freedom.
I'm a Palestinian born and raised in Gaza Strip.
Born and raised in Jerusalem, Al-Quds.
And
I am a Palestinian American.
After October 7th, things just changed entirely for us. I truly believe that this war actually kind of shaken a little bit the beliefs of both people.
Hamas as a political movement does not serve the long-term Palestinian goals.
We need a new way forward. What has been done in our name has not brought us closer to freedom or safety.
It's not easy for Palestinians to speak up for peace. We have seen videos in Gaza where Hamas shoots and kills people who criticize them or speak up for peace.
We were shocked when we found people who were outside of the whole conflict living in the US or other areas in the world and not accepting peace.
إنه كتير سهل الحديث عن الصمود والمقاومة والثالث طالما أنت ما بتدفع الثمن وما بتدفع أي ثمن في هذا الإشي.
Speaking up for peace is not easy, but it's necessary.
My message to people who are pro-Palestine is to be actually pro-Palestine. Being pro-Palestine is to be pro-peace. The acceptance of coexistence is really important.
One's safety depends on the other. It's about choosing a path that actually leads somewhere better. I believe in resistance through education, through building, through dialogue. That's how we win.
For example, working with younger generations, working with educational institutions.
And like so many of my fellow Palestinians, I want peace, dignity, freedom, and justice for me, for my family, and for my community, and for my neighbors, and for my Jewish cousins and fellow Israelis.
We truly believe that peace is possible.
A lot of Palestinians feel this way, but fear speaking up. That's why initiatives like Realign for Palestine are important. We need to be protected and we need to be supported. We need to show that peace is not weakness, it's courage.
These aren't some abstract concepts, because at the end of the day, the choice isn't between resistance and surrender. It is between survival and destruction.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. I think we're good. Good morning. I'm really delighted to be here with you today. My name is Marissa Khurma, and I am the program director of the Middle East program at the Wilson Center, a very friendly think tank to the Atlantic Council. So thank you for this kind invitation. I'm very much looking forward to this important conversation today to launch Realign for Palestine. We've seen the videos, we've heard Ahmed and Kamal and Hamza and many others talk about how different this is, how much needed it is, how critical, how urgent, and how this new wave of activism is focused on a complete rejection of violence, a complete rejection of radicalization, of violent extremism, and a complete embrace of a path forward that only through dialogue, conversations, and bringing people together, particularly Palestinians and Israelis, but also Arabs and Jews, Muslims and others that are very much impacted by this conflict, to continue the work in a peaceful way. That is the only path forward. I am Jordanian American, and like many of my colleagues in the think tank community, in the policymaking community, particularly since October 7th, have been laser focused on the work that we're all committed to do to ensure that we're providing objective analysis, that we're raising diverse voices, and to ensure that we're being fair in the way that we talk about and discuss the developments in Israel, in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, in Israel and Palestine, essentially. And it has been a very tough journey for a lot of people, particularly for some of us, and this is, again, akin to many of my colleagues who are of the Jewish faith or Arab Americans working in the space, to bring self into this work. And sometimes asked to provide dispassionate analysis of the most passionate conflict that so many people are impacted by. But it is important to bring self to this conversation because, as we heard from Jenna, empathy is key to bridging these divides, to continuing this conversation. And again, like one of the themes that I saw throughout the work that I've done in the last year and a half and the many conversations I've had is that the humanizing of the other has become more and more difficult. And that's why it is so important to hear from voices like Ahmed and Kamal and Hamza and many others that joined this new initiative to understand the path forward and how we can work together. Both Palestinian and Israeli societies are traumatized by the horrific attacks of October 7th and what that has done to the Israeli psyche, and of course it reverberates across the Jewish community worldwide. And similarly, the brutal war that Israel has conducted in Gaza, the loss of life, the destruction, complete hopelessness that we have seen, the suffering, and what this has done to Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, as well as Palestinians in the diaspora. So I am truly honored to be part of this conversation. This is very hard work. When Ahmed and I talked about preparation for this panel last week, we talked about how difficult it is to hold two truths and work through this setting, through this environment. That one truth that supports pro-Palestinian or Palestinian self-determination and Palestinian rights, and the second truth that supports Israel's right to peace and security. And holding these two truths together is very difficult. So this is very courageous and very critical at this time. I also bugged Ahmed about the fact that there are no women activists on this panel, and that a women moderator is not enough. But I know that part of the challenge is to also to muster up the courage to have women activists to feel safe in an environment that they can hold these truths in a very vocal manner like you guys are doing. So thank you again for this opportunity, and I'm going to kick this off and I think circle back to what I mentioned earlier, bringing self to this. You all have personal stories that have driven you to do what you're doing. So Ahmed Fuad Al-Khatib, as the leader of Realign for Palestine, I'd like to start with you. Tell us a little bit more about your personal story and how did you come to working, particularly choosing this path forward.
Well, thanks again, Marissa, for being here. Thank you all for coming on a Friday to hear us talk. It's as if the entirety of my lived experience has really been leading to this moment, and not specifically to this event, but this moment in terms of putting together the different threads of my life, my professional background, how I grew up in the Middle East, how I grew up in Gaza, how I came to the United States, and bringing that all together to hopefully be of service to my people. So I grew up in Gaza until the age of 15. I came to the United States as an exchange student, supposedly for a year. It was a post 9/11 initiative to build cultural bridges. And upon completing the program in California, I attempted to go back to Gaza in 2006, but Hamas had already won the infamous 2006 elections. And when I was in Egypt about to cross, Hamas abducted Gilad Shalit, a young Israeli soldier, and that started a mini war in Gaza. And I was also faced with a variety of dangers due to my participation in the cultural exchange program, which at the time was a novelty in a Palestinian context, to have a teenager live in the United States for an entire year. Thanks to the support of peace and human rights activists in the United States, I was able to come back here, apply for, and ultimately receive political asylum. And the very day of my asylum interview was June 14th, 2007, which is the very day that Hamas violently took over the Gaza Strip. And I was part of the first wave of Palestinians from Gaza who received asylum here because of Hamas's control. And throughout my time in the US, I, as a teenager, really, without my family, I was living with a host mother who was neither Arab or Muslim or Jewish. I really did struggle in defining what community is for me. Is it Arab, Muslim, Palestinian Americans? Is it everybody? Like, am I defined by my lived experience as a Gazan? Do I belong as an American? And there were two trackways. One was being a part of the Palestinian and Arab community and pursuing what you would call traditional forms of pro-Palestine activism on colleges, as part of demos, as part of what, off-the-shelf organizations that were available at the time. But I also began actually engaging with Israelis, with American Jews, with folks who self-identified as Zionists, and was really curious, like what was that about? And I had never interacted with a Jewish or Israeli person when I was in Gaza. And so the duality of those two tracks that I was pursuing was my first exposure to the ability to hold multiple truths, to actually being able to be pro-Palestine while also acknowledging the pain and suffering of Israelis and the Jewish community, both historic. I knew nothing about the Holocaust. I knew nothing about Jewish history, but also contemporary, and actually seeing people whose families suffered from the suicide bombings. And I had, again, never, and it really triggered something in me, that the first exposure to the concept of there are no winners in this conflict. There are no winners in this war. And yes, we can talk about the imbalance of power dynamics between the Palestinian and Israeli people, but at the end of the day, there really is commonality among when it comes to suffering, when it comes to aspirations. Fasting forward to when I became a citizen of the United States 11 years ago, I tried to build an internationally run, Israeli-approved airfield in the Gaza Strip, Project Unified Assistance. And that was also my first kind of reality check into what pragmatic policy making is versus ideologically driven activism, and it looks like, and how I felt that there was really an inherent conflict in one's ability to be on college campuses and to participate in demonstrations and to say X, Y, Z. And I care about the Palestinians, and I care about the blockade, and I care about all these issues. And then when I came up with a specific solution, a very targeted, narrow approach to solve a problem, which was the lack of freedom of movement in Gaza due to the blockade, due to Hamas's control, due to Egypt's restrictions, and due to Israeli restrictions as well. A lot of the activist community that I used to once be a part of really didn't support that. They thought that this was going to make Israel look good. They thought that this was going to be a partial solution. They thought that, well, how dare you say you want to build an airport that's Israeli approved? We should build an airport in spite of Israel, and we should have a plain Tilla, and we should just like all of these unrealistic frameworks that very quickly woke me up to the reality of this is not how we're going to actually improve the lives of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Because it was not about what some academic theory. This was my mom and dad and my family. I came here, and I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And most of my family remained in Gaza when I left. So my dad, who passed away 5 years ago, he was an UNRWA physician, UNRWA, the UN agency that's become quite controversial in recent times. And he ran the UNRWA clinic in Jabalia in the northern part, where we saw Kareem in the video in that decimated area. My oldest brother right now is in Gaza as we speak. He runs one of the biggest British, runs field work for one of the biggest British NGOs. And my family and my mom remained there. Fasting forward so that was really kind of like the anchoring, those two, the aforementioned pieces were the anchoring experiences in introducing the new framework. And then fasting forward to post-October 7th, and I was genuinely horrified by what I saw unfold both on that day and in the immediate aftermath. I immediately recognized that this was going to be a disaster of epic proportions for the entirety of our people in Gaza and beyond. I recognized that like my family, just like everybody else, was going to suffer horrendously because of it. I was horrified by the taking of women and children and the elderly as hostages. And I felt deeply offended that these are not the values of my people in Gaza, where I remember my uncle who ran where he worked for the Palestinian Authority, and he was the head of the Paralympics for the Palestinian Authority. And I remember seeing so many foreign delegations, including women, including folks from all backgrounds and walks of life, and how they were treated with respect, and how there was never a question of what you do with, like, the Arab culture and hospitality and what we do. And there were red lines even on how you carry out attacks. And Hamas, I remember, I'll never forget it, in 2003, tried to put out this propaganda video about an attack on Gush Katif, which was the settlement in Gaza. I left 1 month before the withdrawal of Israeli settlements, and said, we were going to attack and kill all these soldiers, but we saw a civilian vehicle and we saw children in it and we're merciful. Like even then, there was at least a pretense. So I thought, surely we can all say no to this. We could say we have injustices, but no, this is not appropriate. This is criminal. This is ineffective. This is wrong. Even as we advocate for fundamental changes for the people of Gaza and for the ending of the military occupation and the promotion of the two-state solution. And I was really, really disappointed and quite alarmed by the trends that we were seeing, just as I was alarmed by the dehumanization of the Palestinian people and the portrayal of everybody in Gaza as an animal and a terrorist, and they all want to kill Jews, and they all want to, I felt that there was incitement on both sides. So I decided to put myself out there to challenge those trends of dehumanization, not thinking about Realign for Palestine, not thinking about where this would go. I just felt that this was an existential crisis that both of our people were facing. And unfortunately, my worst nightmares were realized when on 3 separate occasions, there were 3 separate Israeli airstrikes that killed a total of 33 of my immediate and extended family members. And my childhood home where I grew up in Gaza City in the north was destroyed. My brother, who works for that British NGO that I told you about, and his wife and 4 children were in the house when it was hit, and they pushed their way out of the rubble. My 12-year-old niece didn't make it. I've had 15 of my family members were badly wounded. And then a follow-on airstrike, that was October 13th. Follow-on airstrike on October 25th took place and killed my uncle Riyadh, who worked in Israel, spoke perfect Hebrew, had incredible relations with different community folks in Israel. And then the worst of them all was on December 14th, where an airstrike killed 29, wiped out my mom's family, basically, in Rafah, in southern Gaza. And so that, again, really had me at a crossroads. And it tested my commitment to this idea of mutual empathy and mutual humanity. And there were a lot of people looking to me and saying, is Ahmed going to actually stick with this? Or is he, So I decided to honor their legacy by doubling down on this path towards acknowledging the empathy, the humanity of Palestinians and Israelis. And finally, I wanted to build that into something that's bigger than just myself, and pursuing allies and friendships with Kamal, with Hamza, building a network of Palestinians who can hold multiple truths, and then elevating that into effective, pragmatic policymaking.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, and I'm very sorry for your losses. It's unimaginable to still be committed to dialogue and peaceful coexistence and work through this pain and this trauma. So I want to turn to you, Kamal. You have a story of your own to share as well, and you've joined Ahmed in this work. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Marissa, again. Thank you for having me. And I'm so sorry, Ahmed. It's very, I'm very happy that I'm sitting next to you. Every time I meet you, I learn more stuff about your experience, which is very impressive. I share a lot with his experience because I grew up in Gaza. I lived my entire life there. I moved here just last year. And I went to honorable schools. I had this education, and I encountered Hamas as a regime since I was 8 years old when they took over Gaza in 2007. My experience isn't really any better. It was full of war contacts, atrocities all over my entire childhood. Since I was born in 1999, in 2001 there was a war. In 2005 there was another war, and again happened more than 5 times since I moved out. And speaking more recently about what happened on October 7th, I was visiting my family. I was working outside in Saudi Arabia, and then I visited my family on October 5th, just 2 days before the war. And the day before the war started, I was walking with my mom very close to Ashkelon, the settlement next to Gaza Strip. And I was telling her, like, my mom, we should use this huge space in the sea. They were like building a project or something. I was telling her that we should make a company that's shared between Israelis and Palestinians, and we should supply energy to Gaza Strip and using this huge space. And I started dreaming about stuff that I could do, and all of a sudden we went home and we woke up the next morning and we heard about the attacks on Israel, and I was shocked when I saw all the videos and photos coming out of Israel. And as what Ahmed said, this is not what we believe in as Palestinians. And that, again, as Muslims, this is not acceptable for us. But again, like Hamas, as what I mentioned in the video, does not represent what Palestinian people believe in. And building on this, again, going back to how I grew up in Gaza, I encountered this radicalism being taught in schools and by Hamas leaders in support of their ideology, very extremist ideology that I hated and I worked so hard to change. Thankfully, I was able to do some positive things when I was there, but again, going through all the, the suppression that Hamas imposes on the people of Gaza was very difficult for me and for my family. I try to change a lot, but unfortunately, we lack support, we lack resources, and that was very challenging for me. I moved here, I had to start my life again. I used to be an attorney, I used to work as a lawyer, and when I moved here last year, I had to do that again. So I'm now in law school, and I'm doing a lot of work on the side to support initiatives like Realign For Palestine and what the Atlantic Council is trying to do. I started my peace building activism at a very young age. I was only 15 years old when I joined Seeds of Peace. Probably a lot of people know about it. It's a very amazing, ambitious initiative that brings young people, very young people, 14, 15, 16 years old, to attend the summer camp. And that was in 2015. Right, like just after the war that happened in 2014. So it was very challenging for me to be here. And then again, after we attended that program, on the way back, we were arrested by Hamas for our participation. But of course, that's not the end of it. I said, okay, you're gonna arrest me now. The moment I leave, I'm just gonna reach out again and do the work that I did. And we continued to do this. We attended several camps and several courses in Israel and Palestine, and we came here. And recently I started working for them during the summer camp. I was part of the community action program in 2023, and that's actually before the 2024 war and Hamas attacks. And also last year I was part of their dialogue program as well. We continue to do this work because we believe that both people can come together despite all the chaos that we see in the news. I truly believe that it's easier than we think, but again, it's all about resources, people, and bring all the truths again and address it in a way that we can actually think forward.
Thank you so much, Kamal, for sharing your story with us as well. And I'm gonna turn to Hamza, who's joining us from Germany. Hamza, tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you also decided to choose a path of dialogue and peace.
Thank you. Rival neighborhood, and I was a quiet accountant who was living during the realities of living in the Gaza Strip, whether that was with the Israeli blockade, Hamas's oppressive rule since they took over the power in Gaza in 2007. So I started witnessing firsthand the terrible consequences of Hamas's takeover of the power in Gaza, the public executions, the silence of decent voices, and the list goes on. And I was silent about that until in 2019, I participated with the other group of Palestinians in Gaza who were yearning for better economical conditions in the Strip. And we formed the We Want to Live movement, and we started protesting against Hamas for the first time in Gaza's history. And we went out to the streets with simple demands, saying that we want to live and that we want also to live as the wealthy elite of Hamas's members and supporters living in the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, we were oppressed, and I personally was imprisoned and tortured by Hamas for a few weeks until I finally get released. And I continued to call for the human rights of the people of Gaza, but on a smaller scale in Gaza. Until in 2023, we protested again against Hamas, demanding the same demands, better economical conditions, some elections, so maybe we can get rid of Hamas and bring another alternative for the Gaza Strip that might actually prioritize our needs and our interests. And unfortunately, that also didn't work, and I was imprisoned again until I was released in August. And I realized back then that my ability to make a change or to be a voice also for the Gazans required me to leave Gaza, and I left to Germany, and I continued my activism, not as an outsider, but as a voice for the people who can't speak freely in the Gaza Strip. And since leaving Gaza, I became a strong advocate for the Palestinian voices in the Gaza Strip, who are often ignored and overlooked by the major media outlets, as they reject Hamas's violence and they are yearning for peace. So I started writing op-eds, I started doing interviews, and I amassed hundreds of thousands of followers on social media who see through the hypocrisy of Western support for extremist ideologies. And I remember once Ahmed told me about the idea of the Realign for Palestine, I said to myself that this idea itself is the thing that I also wish that existed many years ago for the Palestinian movement that rejects extremism, that rejects violence, and this self-destructive leadership that are governing not only the Gaza Strip, but the Palestinian politics in general, because those people deserve a serious and a strategic and a pragmatic leadership that prioritizes their needs, not to use them in a war of ideologies, something that can achieve what those people are yearning for. So I support Realign because it rejects all the old paths that did not work for the Palestinians, the quote unquote armed resistance, the violence, the extremism, and to come with a viable and a pragmatic solution that can achieve a true independence and a state for the Palestinians next to an Israeli state in the region.
Thank you so much, Hamza. And this is a very opportune moment to pivot to the conversation that sort of you started talking about, Ahmed, with regards to the challenge that you are addressing through Realign for Palestine. We talked about the dehumanization on both sides. I think being a native Arabic speaker, and all of us are here on the panel, when you watch the news or read the news in the West versus in the region, it almost seems like you're watching a completely different war. And the voices that are prioritized in all the headlines are those, and are heard by audiences in both worlds, let's say, are those of the far right, whether it's Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and others that support, excuse me, the so-called axis of resistance that are also Iran has been nurturing for decades. But also on the Israeli side, the far-right Israeli voices that very openly talk about the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, of taking over, of forced displacement, that sometimes barely gets covered in the US media or makes the headlines, let's say. So, but you identified a problem that you think Realign for Palestine addresses. So tell us a little bit more about how you diagnose this particular challenge in the Palestinian movement.
So for me, it's very critical that, yes, we can talk about Israeli extremism in politics, in electoral dynamics, the behavior of the violent settlers and what's happening, the behavior of soldiers on the ground in Gaza. But for that to actually be credible, for that to actually matter and go somewhere, we also need to talk internally as Palestinians and have that internal dialogue. We have to clean house. We have to actually do introspection. We have to look inwardly, not to victim blame or to self-hate. I love my people. I love my community. And I care so deeply about our folks. And I care so deeply about the narrative being accurately reflective of what our people aspire to, that's why I want to focus inward, even as I incorporate vast critiques of Israeli policies and Israeli approaches by the current government and by certain a certain ethos that doesn't see the Palestinian people as a real people, that doesn't believe in Palestinian statehood. So just establishing that Realign for Palestine while calling out the dehumanization, my purpose is very deliberately to kind of bolster our community from within. There really are three big problems that I see impacting the Palestinian people right now. There is a stale national project with a stale unupdated narrative, if you will, that has been stuck for decades in the same cycle and the same kind of talking points over and over. There's the second one is that there is I believe, an existential risk to the very existence of the Palestinian people from within by somebody like Hamas that has been a useful idiot to the far right in Israel to make our people vulnerable such that we're even talking about the potential expulsion. We're facing the risk of expulsion on a regular basis, such that Hamas's base was weaponized, and I'm not trying to get too much into the details, as a useful idiot to keep the Palestinians politically divided, to keep the Palestinians away from realizing the two-state solution. And that's not blaming Israel for all of our problems. That is simply to say that Hamas was very valuable for some of these extremists in Israel. That alone should delegitimize Hamas. That alone should make it some worthy of contempt, worthy of being completely rejected. And instead, we don't see that, and instead we see people going out of their way to normalize Hamas. And then the third, and I would argue even like perhaps most critical problem we have, is that in the diaspora communities, and diaspora is tiered. There's the diaspora in the region, there's diaspora in Europe, and then there's diaspora in the United States. There has been an abysmal and a disastrous failure in accurately nurturing a compelling pro-Palestine narrative that leverages the support the Palestinians have among people, among students, among different governments to lead somewhere meaningful. Instead, what we have seen is the rise of extremism, the normalization of Hamas, the celebration of hostage-taking as being an act of resistance, the refusal to call out Hamas, the refusal to speak about Hamas, out of a fear that this somehow, normalizes the war in Israel. Or like people tell me all the time, a lot of my detractors will tell me that, well, I may not like Hamas, but if you talk about Hamas, something about that gives you'll be tokenized by the pro-Israel community, or the Israeli government will like you, or that means you're okay with the killings in Gaza, or that means you're somehow fine with the dehumanization of your own people. So again, very black and white, very reductionist, overly simplistic. I actually think our narrative is bolstered by being anti-Hamas. And as one of my colleagues here, Will, who's somewhere here, says that you cannot rationally be pro-Palestine without being anti-Hamas. Hamas is an existential threat to the very legitimate and just and urgent aspirations of the Palestinian people. So for me, when I recently was at a university in New Jersey speaking, and I was talking about the tragedy of my family. I was invited by a professor to speak at about a professor who deals with conflict resolution and peace and reconciliation, not just on Israel and Palestine, on like conflicts worldwide. And as I was describing the tragedy of my family, as I was calling out the far right in Israel, as I was making a plea for the justness of the Palestinian cause, but also saying Hamas is an abomination, Hamas is a despicable actor. And it's not just Hamas, it's what Hamas represents, which is an internal rot to the value system and an internal decay that eats away at the legitimacy of the Palestinian cause that must be attacked, that must be tackled and addressed. A bunch of, students for the infamous group, SJP, came and started shouting me down and started calling me traitor and literally disrespected my family, disrespected me, acted as if they know what's best for the Palestinian people. When I was literally talking about my 12-year-old niece and 33 of my family being slaughtered by Israeli bombardment and talking about like Netanyahu bad, like settlers bad, like we need a Palestinian state, but we must first start by cleaning house and dealing with Hamas. So this is what I'm talking about. Yeah. Precisely. And that's what I really want to address.
Yeah, and before going to you, Kamal, I don't know how many people have actually seen this poll, but just about 2 weeks ago, there was a new Palestinian poll that emerged out of Gaza that showcased that only 5 or 6% of Palestinians actually support Hamas ruling Gaza after the war, right? Talking to officials in the region just in the last 2 weeks, the talking point that kept on repeating itself was that the further away you go from Gaza and the West Bank, the more likely you will see support for the ideology of armed resistance because all the other efforts are not bearing fruit, right? So this is also part of the challenge, right? Is that how do you do this from within, but also make sure that this resonates? But essentially, it's a Palestinian project.
And may I just very briefly just say, yes, like the idea is that if you don't have to deal with the consequences of life under Hamas, it's easy to be pro-resistance. It's easy to be pro the idea of, we're with Hezbollah and we're with the Houthis and we're with the Islamic Republic of Iran. But there's a disconnect. Like literally one of my raison d'etres is that there's a disconnect between what the people of Gaza want versus what the diaspora community want. And I look to the pro-Israel community in the Western world and in the diaspora. Israel was created in large part thanks to the efforts of the diaspora community. If you're a pro-Israel or a Jewish student or somebody who's a moderate Zionist or however you are on the Zionism spectrum, you have a whole lot of options to be a part of. There's Hillel, there's the J Streets of the world, there's the JVPs out there, there's ADL, there's all these organizational options that you have.
More diverse positions.
For our community, we have nothing. We have students for something in Palestine. It's not justice. I don't know what it is. And that's it. And that percolates not just on college campuses. It then captures the cultural centers. It captures a lot of the think tank personalities. And I want to disrupt that. And I want to change that.
Thank you, Ahmed. So over to you, Kamal, if you have anything to add from your experience about the diagnosis of this challenge, right, within the Palestinian movement, particularly in the diaspora. Since you're here, you're also a law student here, so you must also have conversations and a perspective from your experience. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So I go to school, so I technically see all what Ahmed is actually mentioning, and it frustrates me a lot. And I think there's a famous saying that says, it's good to speak about a problem until it's my problem. So for a lot of these people, it's very fun and very good to speak about these issues because it's not their problem, basically. A lot of these people are either born here or born outside of Palestine, and they've never seen how armed resistance looks like. It never served any mission in the entire world. I think the most major conflicts in the world were solved by diplomacy and negotiation. Northern Ireland and other places in South Africa and other areas around the world. And what we've seen is actually not only supporting armed resistance, but also like promoting those radical and extremism ideologies that actually doesn't serve the Palestinian cause. And it's very based on misinformation, a lot of misunderstanding on what the Palestinian conflict is about, and how armed resistance in Palestine itself, in Gaza right now, is hurting. How going back to the ultimate goal of the Palestinian people is to have a Palestinian state, and having armed resistance in the form of Hamas or other groups is basically destroying all the goals and plans that we have. And again, it's just distracting people and putting the Palestinians in a position where everyone's looking at them as in form of terrorists, which is very unfortunate. And again, we have the people, we have the right people, we have the resources that we need to be more innovative in terms of finding a solution that would serve this ultimate goal. But unfortunately, I think there is a big movement, and it needs like a bigger, coping mechanism to change it and reform it in the right direction.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a long-term project as well. So,
yeah.
Hamza, I want to go to you, because you have also your own experiences. You had to go and essentially set up a shop in exile in order to work through this. So how do you see some of the main challenges from within?
Actually, the problem with the Western pro-Palestinian diaspora people is that they represent anything but the Palestinians, especially those who had to live under the realities of living in the Gaza Strip or also in the West Bank. The problem with those people is that they go and they glorify whatever terrorist regime is available in the spectrum, and ignoring the devastating outcomes that those regimes bring to the people of Palestine and to the people of Israel. And their calls even for the intifada, for the violence, while sitting in safe Western countries completely detached from the war and the bombs without even having to deal with the consequences of it. And the other problem with those pro-Palestinian Westerns, especially in the U.S., is the spread of anti-Semitism, and to push that in the Palestinian cause, push that rhetoric in the Palestinian cause in a way that portrays the Palestinian cause itself as an anti-Semitic cause, and for sure pushes away any hope for a reconciliation or a coexistence between the two communities. And the other problem with those people, especially in the campus protest, is the push for maximalist and unrealistic calls and demands that has nothing to do also with the human rights of the Palestinians, and that can never even benefit those Palestinians. And they did not even stop here. Those people even started demonizing and dehumanizing anyone that goes against their narrative, anyone that calls for a pragmatic solution, that calls for coexistence and peace between the two societies, to label him as a traitor, as a collaborator to his own people. So the reality is that whatever those people are calling for is completely detached from what the people in Gaza are calling for right now. Those people are tired from these endless cycles of war and the quote-unquote armed resistance. Those people are yearning for a downsizing, for this scale of violence, and for a moment of peace. So I think that a time has come to change this narrative and to reclaim our cause from the pro-Palestinian community in the diaspora right now.
Thank you, Hamza. And now to, well, how can Realign for Palestine address these challenges that you three gentlemen have discussed? It takes a village. It takes a lot of conversations, dialogue with those that you are not going to even agree with. I always, tell various groups that I speak to that pass through the Wilson Center that even through this horror and pain and trauma that both Israeli and Palestinian society are going through, there is still hope, because I have spoken to so many Israelis and Palestinians who work together Some of their work is public, some of their work is not, but they are more aligned than ever before. I've heard this from a few peace activists, Israeli peace activists, who said the peace camp in Israel has never been more united because they understand the importance of working together. And so those are potential allies. So I know you don't have to talk about the whole strategy, but how do you see Realign for Palestine fitting into this effort that you think is much needed for pro-Palestinian movement?
Certainly. So I see two parallel / concurrent tracks, if you will. One that focuses on the narrative piece and actually like really addressing the narrative of what does it mean to be Palestinian, pro-Palestine? What is it that what are the Palestinian aspirations? What are the how do we evolve this issue, for example, of being perpetual refugees, the right of return? Like my parents and grandparents came out of 1948, but like 2/3 of Gazans, for example, are considered refugees. Like that's why we're part of the UNRWA system. But if Gaza's going to be truly reformed, and not reformed, reconstituted and rejuvenated, and if you're going to have a renaissance there, you can't have 2/3 of Gazans thinking that they're perpetual refugees. There is not going to be the right of return of 2/3 of Gazans to what is now mainland Israel. We can talk about what mechanisms and healing and reconciliation, what that looks like. And those are red lines. Those are like taboos in a Palestinian context. Even though the Palestinian Authority, even though a lot of Palestinian leaders understand that for a two-state solution, there really is no pathway for that issue. But like someone needs to break that taboo and have those conversations about the narrative piece. Someone needs to in a Palestinian context, like I had someone reach out recently, as in like yesterday, and tell me that, well, I love everything you're doing, but we have to be really careful about the messaging, with Hamas. Like, there's a very dominant narrative that I hear all the time by people who are very anti-Hamas in a
within the Palestinian.
From within the Palestinian, mainly, especially from like the professional Palestinian class, if you will, because they have business interests and they're working. Even the Palestinian Authority folks, I've sat down with senior PA officials who despise Hamas, and this was in a peace conference, context, and they're just like, they refuse to call out Hamas by name because that's somehow seen as we're not, being united or whatever. Or how about that wonderful plan to sideline Hamas in Gaza by our wonderful friends in Egypt? There are many good friends in there, and my colleague Tom here identified and wrote for the Atlantic Council about the good things that I think we should use from the Egyptian plan. But it's like a plan to sideline Hamas, 106 pages that don't mention the word Hamas once by name. Like, you see what I mean? Like, that is the ethos. So that's the narrative work. And then pragmatism, the second track, rather, is being politically driven and politically focused with a particular interest in Gaza, taking a Gaza first approach. And I want to be careful in how I message this. Gaza first, not in like the Palestinian MAGA equivalent, but saying that Gaza as the starting point, the role model for what Palestinian statehood looks like. Gaza, unfortunately, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the withdrawal of Israeli settlements, and tens of billions of dollars, multiple wars, tens of thousands of lives later, and Gaza's in ruins. The people are decimated, hopeless, and destitute. We wasted 2 decades thanks to Hamas and not calling them out and trying to have unity with them and trying to be diplomatic. And it's time that we actually make Gaza into the role model, the jewel of the Palestinian people on the Mediterranean. And when I say this, what blows my mind is when I say this, people are like, oh, you sound like Hasbara. You sound like Israeli propaganda. And I'm like, what is propagandistic about wanting Gaza to be a beautiful, prosperous, economically viable connected place to the outside world. Like, tell me how is that Israeli propaganda? Tell me how is that bad for the Palestinian National Project to prove what an occupation-free West Bank can and should look like, to prove that when when we reach a negotiated settlement to pull out, when we reach a political resolution to the settlement issue, the vacating of settlements in the West Bank will not lead to a Gaza 2.0 situation. That is a legitimate concern, and I'm not saying we should never, we should cede that argument that the Israelis have on their side right now, because have you heard about the Iranian influence in the West Bank? The attempts to meddle in, the attempts to send Western Union transfers, and I mean, the Palestinian Authority on a regular basis is foiling attempts in Jenin, in Nablus, in Tulkarem, to have the agents of Iran and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and whatever, and to funnel money to destabilize the West Bank. So I want to focus on Gaza. One of my chief launching projects is going to be taking a lot of the rubble with cooperation and collaboration with Israel, to take a lot of the rubble in Gaza and to recycle it and basically dump it into the sea and off the coast of the Strip, and build an artificial peninsula, to put a small airstrip and a small seaport, and to have that begin the 1,000-mile journey towards opening Gaza up to the outside world. It's not just about having a piece of infrastructure. There's symbolism in there. There's working with Israel. Yours truly was a big proponent in pushing for the airdrops that took place. And I had a whole host of international human rights and humanitarian organizations come out and condemn the airdrops and call me out. What they didn't realize was that I was interested in much more than just the airdrops. I was trying to prove a concept that Gaza's airspace, after 24 years of being solely controlled by the Israeli Air Force, could actually, when security is addressed and solved for, you had the air forces of 10 nations operating over the airspace of Gaza during an active conflict in full coordination with Israel. So we saw the maritime corridor with Cyprus, and yes, the J-lots and what the United States didn't work out as intended. But again, we showed that Gaza's airspace and the territorial waters, when security concerns are addressed for Israel, are open for business. And that's what radical pragmatism for policy making to transform Gaza looks like.
Thank you, Ahmed. Kamal, how do you see Realign for Palestine addressing some of those challenges?
So of course, basically one of the reasons why I joined this initiative is because I believe that there are a lot of Palestinian voices and leadership who are not empowered, and they're spread all over the world. Their voice, as what Hamza said, is overcome by foreign media, and all the focus is on what Hamas is doing in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
So, for example, what I've done the past 2 years, we did a huge study on recycling a plant in Gaza Strip for all this huge rubbles we have, and we also worked on a solar energy program as well to help facilitate some of the solar energy work. But again, nobody speaks about it. The issue is we need a platform that we, young people, young professionals who can solve part of the problem, to be empowered and amplified in a way that we gain more support.
And own the narrative.
Yeah, of course. So that's what I believe, that this work is really important, because again, there are a lot of people who need empowerment, and we lack resources, and unfortunately, now we see the support is draining a little bit, so that's also an issue. And I want to just bring some numbers here, again, back to what happened in Northern Ireland. More than $40 billion were invested to solve that issue, and it was solved. How much money we spent in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Less than 500 million. That's way less than 5% of what they actually spent in Northern Ireland.
You're talking about peace-building efforts.
Exactly, yeah.
Specifically peace-building.
Yeah, peace-building, and the initiatives that, Realign for Palestine is one of them. And again, those young people need the platform, they need the resources, they need the ability to do more work, and we need the international work to shift on focusing on this work rather than focusing on what Hamas is doing and what the Palestinian pro-Palestine movements are doing in the U.S. And unfortunately, like we're pretty far from that. So it's sad again, but like hopefully we can further do that, through Realign for Palestine and what the Atlantic Council is trying to do.
And you will also represent, one group amongst others that perhaps there will be like a contagion effect, because you do need diverse voices that can come together in support of Palestinians and Palestinian self-determination. Hamza, I want to go to you to also ask the same question before I turn to some of the audience questions I'm getting, about how you see, not necessarily the solution, but how Realign for Palestine can be a vehicle for the change that you have been advocating for.
So at the beginning, I think the important thing is to first expose the unhelpful and the impractical and the destructive approaches by the current pro-Palestinian movement, and to then challenge the current narratives and the taboos within the pro-Palestinian movement, which has failed us over and over again, whether we are talking about the armed resistance, the BDS, and the list goes on. And to condemn the violence, whether it was perpetrated by a Palestinian or an Israeli, and to come up with a new narrative, one that rejects terrorism and violence, no matter who's committing these acts, and to come up with a strategy that overcomes our emotional slogans, and to advocate for actual governance instead of endless militancy, and to encourage a Palestinian agency and responsibility for that, instead of blaming everyone else, while at the same time ignoring the legendary corruption of our leadership. And to push for Palestinian self-determination that is not dedicated by Hamas or any extreme voice, whether that was Qatar, the Iranian regime, and the list goes on. So those are the main requirements for us to come up with a new narrative that challenges the existing one.
Thank you, Hamza.
And Marissa, if I may, just to really kind of capture the essence as we move to questions. The essence of Realign for Palestine, kind of the foundational base, if you will. When you build a long, big towers, you always have that concrete slab that's like 2 floors high. Realign for Palestine relies on really just like 4 sets of values, if you will. Radical pragmatism, the rejection of violence, the embrace of peace and coexistence and healing and reconciliation as courageous evolutions, not treacherous, cowardly actions, but courageous evolutions that are necessary to promote the Palestinian aspirations. The acknowledgement of multiple truths that can be real and valid at once, without being in eternal and perpetual conflict and opposition to each other, and the necessity to promote the 2-nation solution, which people have asked me back and forth, like, how is that different than the 2-state solution? 2-nation solution, I mean, yes, obviously, I'm a 2-stater through and through, regardless of how seemingly not feasible at this moment it is, but I believe that this really remains the only pathway forward, even though I will not entertain empty talk about, like, we need 2 states per the 30-year-old framework of Oslo. However, the 2-nation solution is my way of saying this idea of 1 state is not going to work. You need 2 nations, 2 people, 2 spaces where people can have their own separate national identities, where possible, you can have cooperation. Where necessary, you should have separation. That is entirely fine. But those are the essence, like the central principles of Realign for Palestine. And finally is openness to dialogue and engagement and conversations that build upon these principles. Melanie and I, who's my deputy director, major thanks to her for making this all happen. Really, she's the worker bee behind all of this. We've had hundreds of conversations with prospective Palestinian allies and voices. We've talked to dozens of women, many of whom are men and women, who are completely behind this effort, who are completely in agreement that we need a new effort. The number of Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians who privately cheer me on and say, thank God someone else is doing this. Thank goodness, like someone is saying what we know is true, but we have a hard time or outright can't say so publicly, is staggering. And that in and of itself is a problem. Like that tells you there really is a challenge. And that some aspects of that are not unique to the Palestinian community, and that many communities face this enforced conformity, enforced cohesion. But there is an exceptional layer to the Palestinian cause that after 8 decades of conflict, almost 8 decades since 1948, we still cannot normalize out in the open folks openly saying, I am opposed to Hamas. I am opposed to armed resistance. I understand that Israel is here to stay. I understand Israel has a legitimate right to security, not at the expense of Palestinians, but in concert with the right of Palestinians. And some of those conversations really break my heart for our people and for our beautiful, diverse community that is very well educated, that the Palestinians are some of the most talented, most well-to-do in the Arab and Palestinian world. And I'm not just talking about folks in the land. I'm also talking about folks here in America.
Absolutely.
So that makes me extraordinarily committed to doing this effort.
Thank you. Your two-state versus two-nation discussion was interesting because we do have a question that's, kind of touches on this. Do you see the possibility of a federated political system with Israel rather than forming two states, given the small area and the logistics of maintaining a defense force of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank within the broader state of Israel, especially after decades of warfare with Israel and the lingering stigma of Hamas terrorism? This is from Laurel Atkinson.
I think at this point, that conversation is a little bit too early to have. However, and this is a taboo that I want to start challenging within a Palestinian context, I actually believe that a Palestinian state should consider some form of an internal, intra-Palestinian federation between Gaza and the West Bank. They are geographically separate. They are culturally different. They are politically, at odds, if you will. The journey to transforming Gaza is going to take a while. I just don't see anytime soon a scenario in which you have a centralized Palestinian government in Ramallah running the Gaza Strip and vice versa. That's not to say it's impossible, but I think we should be open to discussing that as a possibility within a Palestinian context, and doing so may very well open up as part of the reimagining the two-state solution may very well open up the possibility of a federation or a confederation. But I remain committed to the idea of an independent state of Palestine with its own flag, its own system, its own, something that allows the Palestinian people to feel like this is our home, even if economically, from a defense and a security point of view, there's a close cooperation that almost mirrors that of a federated state. But I want to have that conversation when it comes to Gaza being a semi-autonomous region that has a federated relationship with the West Bank within a Palestinian context.
States, yeah. Kamal, would you like to chime in also on this?
Yeah, of course. So again, I think it's super early to speak about how we can do this. I think the Palestinians need a transition period to be able to address all the political options they have. And again, if that serves both the Israeli security and the Palestinian right of self-determination, I'm really happy to see that happens. But again, I think it's super early to speak about it, and probably a 5-year term of transition period is needed to see how we can shape the political regime in the Gaza Strip. Again, I don't believe that the current political system in Palestine is efficient, and it's one-sided, and as what Ahmed said, in the West Bank, it's not fully representing what Gaza needs right now. And I think we should definitely work on that to change it in a better way that would definitely serve the long term of Palestinian self-determination. But again, if that's going to help, I'd love to see that, yeah.
Hamza, do you have any points to add to this?
No, actually, I join Ahmed and Kamal's opinion because whether it was a federal, a one state, two states, or a 5-state solution, the solution that achieves for the Palestinians their self-determination, their independence, and for the Israeli community to have their security, their independence, is a solution that I would say okay for it. But it doesn't matter if it was a federal one or not a federal one.
Thank you. One other question. Many states in the Middle East are advocates of multilateralism. For example, Saudi Arabia and others are members of either the Arab League, GCO, I assume other multilateral forums exist. However, there aren't any multilateral forums that exist in the region, and both Iran and Israel are members. As such, do you see the need for a multilateral forum, a permanent body to be located in Gaza for the political integration between states of the region on state, regional, and global issues, especially as such a structure transcends religious divides and the deep divisions between Iran and Israel? There's a lot there.
No, that was interesting to bring Iran into that, but what I'm actually really delighted this came up, because remember what I brought up, this peninsula proposal that I'll be unveiling very soon. Part of that is going to be envisioning how Gaza can, to break Gaza's codependency on Israel and Egypt. And as part of opening Gaza up through its territorial waters and airspace, I actually envision Gaza being connected to the Gulf region. And there are ideas out there and plans as part of IMEC, the India-Middle East corridor that has been put forth to essentially have, as part of the deal to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, to have connectivity through rail, through possible energy corridors that connect the kingdom through Jordan, through Israel, onto the port of Haifa, and then onto Greece. But I very much so envision in an advanced stage of this peninsula, artificial peninsula, that Gaza becomes integrated beyond its immediate neighbor settings. So Gaza can actually unlock Israel's regional integration and be a part of it. How that relates to Iran, I think it's difficult to say, because there's no horizon anytime soon for political transformation in Iran. And Iran and Russia and other players have their own competing corridors, working with China and working with other regional players to undermine IMEC, to undermine connectivity, to undermine integrating Israel into the region. So with the current state of play, I can only see a scenario in which Gaza is part of a Saudi Gulf regional integration with Israel.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I truly believe that part of the solution, the future solution, is to have parties like the Gulf countries and Egypt and Jordan and the US as well to push further for this solution, and also to promote and invest in the future. Without their support, I think it's going to be impossible. And I don't think Iran is going to be a big issue if there's another group of countries who's supporting the idea of two-state solution, because again, like if we have the ability to achieve that solution, I don't think Iran is going to be an issue. And I truly believe that Gaza can be incubated within what Ahmed mentioned as a part of the little peninsula. And there's definitely an opportunity. Gaza has like a very strategic location, and the Palestinian people are able to do a lot of things if they have the resources and the ability to do so. And of course, it's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of investment, of course, in terms of numbers but if we should have the ambition, we should have the initiative to take this further.
speaking of what you just mentioned, the even without resources, how the Palestinians are always able to create. I'm always amazed to see some of these videos that pop up on social media about how with the very little resources and the most horrific conditions that they are able to still provide, set up a little kitchen and feed neighbors. And I think the Ramadan iftar table was quite the image that truly, showcases Palestinian resilience. It is fascinating, yes. I want to go to Hamza because we're also running out of time. Hamza, any thoughts you want to share on this, multilateral forum that Gaza can be part of?
So at the beginning, I think when we are talking about the application of a possible resolution for the Gaza Strip and the Palestine in general, the Iranian regime or the Iranian state at the moment wouldn't have much influence, as if we are talking about the proxies in the region, Hezbollah, the old Syrian government, or collapse and or are deterred. So it won't be that active with Palestinian national project. But I also join Ahmed once again with his opinion with opening the participation with the Gulf states, especially after the rehabilitation of those states from the political Islamist movement and the ground that we share with them right now. So I think there is a good opportunity to have an investment from those countries to the Gaza Strip. But that all must happen after the elimination or the eradication of the Iranian influence and some other countries' influence in the Gaza Strip.
And I just wanted to very briefly add that there's immense, I've never seen this level of immense resentment towards the Islamic Republic of Iran, the government, not the people, for supporting Hamas. I mean, my mother, whom I helped get out.
Gaza?
In Gaza, sorry. My mother, whom I helped get out, I mean, my mother knows nothing about politics and is not she just out of nowhere burst and said to me, they being Hamas, she was like, they destroyed Gaza for Qasem Soleimani. And I was like, Mom, where did that come from? And I just looked at, I've been looking at all the social media and the people of Gaza, Hamas and Iran are synonymous with death and destruction. And so just from a cultural shift, there's an appetite to reorient away from Iran towards the Gulf, to make Gaza kind of part of this shield against Iranian attempts at regional influence. And I see a lot of potential there.
Thank you. Ahmed Fuad Al-Khatib, Kamal Masharawi, and Hamza Abu Huwaidi, thank you so much for today, and thanks to all of you for coming.